Hello everyone, today we read and comment on the 18th paragraph of the second chapter of the second book of von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege. The title being The Impression of Danger, Courage. The text follows. Finally, the combat begets the element of danger, in which all the activities of war must live and move, like the bird in the air or the fish in the water. But the influences of danger all pass into the feelings, either directly, that is, instinctively, or through the medium of the understanding. The effect in the first case, would be a desire to escape from the danger, and if that cannot be done, fright and anxiety. If this effect does not take place, then it is courage which is a counterpoise to that instinct. Courage is, however, by no means an act of the understanding, but likewise a feeling, like fear. The latter looks to the physical preservation, courage to the moral preservation. Courage, then, is a nobler instinct, but because it is so, it will not allow itself to be used as a lifeless instrument, which produces its effects exactly accordingly to prescribed measure. Courage is therefore no mere counterpoise to danger in order to neutralize the latter in its effects, but a peculiar power in itself. Every time I start to comment von Clausewitz's words, I say, oh, this is like very important, like every single thing he says is very important, but this paragraph is also very beautiful to read, and it makes you really reflect a lot. So it's about the impressions of danger, right? So what danger fundamentally triggers in forms of fear and courage that, as we have learned in this paragraph, are fundamentally two different things. So on two different levels, right? They're not simply specular. They have to do with feelings, but still they're produced in two different ways, one more spontaneous, the other in which you have to build more effort for. Reading from Clausewitz, finally, the combat begets the element of danger, right? This is particularly important. The clash generates this feeling of danger, right? In which all the activities of war must live and move, like the bird in the air or the fish in the water, right? So this is particularly important, right? Aside from the sheer poetic tone that here von Clausewitz assumes, like, let's reflect on the single words, in which danger is the element in which all the activities of war must live and move. This is not an option, right? This is not something you can say, well, I can make war without danger. This is particularly important, especially after, in this series of paragraphs, especially the ones at the beginning of the chapter that we have analyzed, relatively to the construction of positive theory of the art of war, in which fundamentally all the moral dimensions were taken out of the equation, right? Because those are complicated to calculate, so let's stick to numbers, to geometrical lines on the battlefield. That's what the science of war should be. No, there is no science of war. There's just an art of war in this sense. And one of the reasons is because combat in itself, right, the duel, what war is at the end of the day, begets the element of danger, in which all activities must live and move, right? This is not an option. You can't fight without risk, without danger, right? All the activities of combat are intrinsically within danger. And they do not just move into it, they live into it. This is very important. Von Clausewitz divides, always focus on every single word that von Clausewitz says. Here it doesn't say that all the activities of war must just move into danger, right? They also must live into danger. They are deeply rooted, and it can't be otherwise, especially. It can't be reversed. There is no other real scenario that can be contemplated into real war. And real war is not like what you say, well, because the real war, because then there is kind of a cheap B-series type of war. No, we talk about literally war as it happens in reality. That is all the war that happens at every single time, right? So this is the most absolute conception here. Danger is not just an eventuality that comes, there every once in a while, or while, you don't expect it fundamentally. No, danger is always there, and it cannot be removed. Even in what seems like the safest of military operations, where risk is reduced to a minimum, no, there's always danger. It's always there, and it can't be eliminated. Every action, every activity of war must live and move like the bird in the air or the fish in the water, which means that these animals are genetically designed to exist into these elements, right? A fish is not like a fish because, it's an animal that happened to be in the water and kind of functions in there as well. No, the fish is designed to live in water, right? So every activity in war is not just, incidentally coming into danger by chance and then dealing with it, right? Every activity of war is genetically built up to move in danger, right? And this is not just like saying a wishful thinking, like, it should be the case that every action is kind of develops in that way in that occasion. No. Here, that's the beautiful from Clausewitz thinking, that it tells you really how it is, that every time you get into war, danger is there, and you are immediately influenced by it. There is no other way. Every functional human being feels that danger and reacts accordingly, right? So there's no way out. There's no other way to contemplate this. There are no options. You're in there, and this is what you have to deal with all the time, every single time, right? This doesn't mean that danger is always the same level. This doesn't mean that danger is fundamentally just something you can't cope with. No, you can't do a big deal of things with about that. But still, you can't eliminate that. And most importantly, and this is also particularly important, it's not just a abstract danger, right? Because theoretically, everything we do is dangerous. If you think about that, if you just leave, you're in constant danger. Like, there are tons of things that can happen from a moment to another on which you have basically no control. Yet we do live, but we live in function of that. Like, look at our biological structure. We are designed to cope with danger. We get triggered, we get alarmed when something, suspicious happens, right? And that's our instinct of survival. So in war, this is exponential. Because of the same nature of what war is as a duel, as a combat. That is, you're not immersed into, once again, an abstract reality where, things can go wrong, but you essentially don't know how and why. You're there because you're fighting against someone. This is probably the single most important thing to remind every time when you try to abstract war, like saying, I should behave in this way because so I can be prepared for everything. No, there's not such a thing. You can be prepared for a certain amount of things, but most of what happens in war, basically, you can't be prepared for. And this happens constantly. And this is really, if you disagree with this, I give you that. It's counterintuitive. It doesn't immediately come to your sight. You think, yeah, well, there is a danger, but can I essentially cope with that? I can minimize it. No, most of what happens is unknown constantly, and we have to deal with it anyway in combat. And there's no way out of there. So war, this is what von Clausewitz says also on other occasions, says that war is the realm of danger, right? It's by definition, it's basically the single most dangerous human activity on average. That's why danger is so important, because it becomes a defining element. Not just because of a, normal environmental risk, but because there is someone who is actively fighting to knock you out, right? To bring you down, to take you down. And it's much more dangerous than other situations, right? Where, in fact, okay, so this phrase is particularly important. We can't even repeat it. The combat begets the element of danger in which all the activities of war must live and move, like the bird in the air or the fish in the water. Just like imprint this in your mind, one way or another, right? It's also a nice picture. And going on, von Clausewitz writes, but the influences of danger all pass into the feelings. Let's reflect on it. But the influences of danger all pass into the feelings. So what is danger actually for us, right? Which is the only thing we care about in this sense. Always remember, von Clausewitz is interested exclusively into practicality. Danger is something we cope with in part coldly, like we will see it now, but fundamentally, danger is something you can't start feeling, right? It's your feelings fundamentally that tell you, look, things that can go wrong. Of course, intelligence helps as well, can make you grow even more prudent, more conscious, but at the same time, if we were just rational, we probably wouldn't do anything, or we would just kill ourselves immediately, because if we were simply rationality, we wouldn't have basically any reason to live for. Absolutely nothing. Just imagine a 100% rational being. Kill yourself. What's the point? There is no point of living anymore, of existing. It's over. But fortunately, we live through feelings. And danger passes into them, either directly, that is instinctively, so this is how von Clausewitz distinguishes the thing from instinct and intelligence, or through the medium of the understanding, right? So it's obvious that the two things are intertwined, right? But instinct is more immediate than intelligence. Yet it's not necessarily the most important thing. Like, instinct is like the grade 0, yeah, okay, for any animal without instinct, we will die all in the range of a very short amount of time. But understanding in war is far more important, right? Because normally, as a rule in war, doesn't win the strongest. It's the most intelligent that wins. This is regularly showed by military history. And going on, the effect in the first case, so talking about instinct, would be a desire to escape from danger. And if that cannot be done, fright and anxiety, right? So it's very simple. That's what instinct tells us, basically. Instinct perceives danger, and our brains tell us, get out of here, right? Stay away from that dangerous thing. That's all what instinct tells us. But, and if that can't be done, we feel frightened and anxious, right? So, this is important because it's not at a behavioral level. This is literally at an instinctive level. It's literally what we think. This passes through feelings, remember. These are feelings, right? It's a matter of what we feel when we are exposed to danger. If we can, we have to get away from there. But if we don't, if we can't, we're frightened and anxious. This is it. And von Clausewitz goes on and says, if this effect does not take place, then it is courage, which is a counterpoise to that instinct. Right? What does this mean? It means that if we're not experiencing that kind of danger, or at least we can counterbalance it in some way, it's because we're injecting courage into our feelings, right? So, which doesn't mean that you really don't feel danger. You're actually counterbalancing it, which is different. You don't eliminate it. You don't reduce it to zero. Courage doesn't mean, like John Wayne, I think once was quoted, like, courage is not like, I don't remember the quote. It was about horse riding. It was like courage is not being. I don't remember. It's jumping on horseback and going. It is being scared to death and jumping on horse back and going. That was something like that. I'm paraphrasing now, but that kind of renders the idea, right? Because that's what courage is at the end of the day. It's not saying, I don't fear anything. It's I fear, but I still go there and I do it anyway. Which von Clausewitz praises, qualitatively speaking, as a feeling, instinctive, in terms of emotionally. Yet he, as it will be evident later now after this phrase, but he goes on here in fact and says, courage is, however, by no means an act of the understanding, but likewise a feeling like fear. Now this is very important because here we're still talking about the direct way in which danger passes into feelings, right? And so courage travels, let's say, the same channel which fear and anxiety do, right? They are in that sense at the same level, but they come from different levels actually, in different sources that differ radically. This is important because von Clausewitz, if you remember, for those who have followed the series, in the first book, distinguishes intelligence, courage, certain types of courage like determination, etc. So here he's basically repeating part of what we already know in this sense by saying that courage has nothing to do with intelligence in itself, right? They're two different things. Courage is a feeling like fear. It's not reason, right? Courage obviously can be taught, like can be produced, let's say better, through intelligence, but they're still two different things. And intelligence alone is not enough to produce courage at all, right? There are people who are maybe are even so intelligent to sort things out in what is happening in war, but fundamentally they don't have the guts to behave accordingly. Maybe they die just like anyone else, right? Just like the guy who simply, went there to fight and got killed. Well, not really. Von Clausewitz goes on saying that the latter, that is fear, looks to the physical preservation, courage to the moral preservation. This is particularly important, right? Fear is telling you, get out of here because you're gonna get hurt, right? It's not just physical. I mean, obviously, there's a psychophysical relation in here. Like, we can be scared also of doing things that may be psychologically harming to us, right? But also because that will have a consequence on our physical side as well, in a way or another. Will make things worse, essentially, in this world that is fundamentally physical, in the sense that, if wrong things happen, even at our psychological level, life is going to be worse, even physically speaking, in its consequences, right? So, instead, courage looks to the moral preservation. So there are two very different things, and you can understand this very easily. The first one says, get out of here because you're gonna get hurt. courage doesn't say, like, get hurt. Courage doesn't have that, reverse sign, opposite sign. It doesn't say that. Its aim is not you to get hurt, even if you're doing something in which you can get hurt, more likely. He is aiming at boosting your morale at that point. So, naturally, as you understand, this is connected with intelligence, with reason, right? It is telling you to do that. So that's why it's also important to distinguish different types of kind of courage. The one that is able to follow what intelligence told you. The other is that just be brave, but just to eventually get scared in the end because you did something without thinking about it, and no matter how courageous you are, in front of a dreadful danger, you will simply calculate that it's too risky, and you will lose that courage at one point. That's axiomatic, right? But it's very important, and in fact, von Clausewitz comments saying courage then is a nobler instinct. Yeah, it is, because it fundamentally, it's like injecting a sort of drug to you. Like it's like those guys who got drunk or used drugs just to assault enemy, the enemy lines because they were too scared. Like in that sense, it was artificial, of course. Courage is something that you can induce yourself without these tricks, and it aims at moral preservation that we think it's going to be for kind of a higher purpose, right, than what in fact fear is presenting you with, because normally kind of more difficult things are usually also some of the most important for us, right? Hence, when we commit ourselves so much to fight against the odds in order to achieve them, well, that's kind of a noble enterprise, right? Even if maybe it has an evil end, who knows? But it's not moral in that kind of ethical sense. It's more about morale in practice. So courage is, in this sense, to be praised, and it has been, with all its limits, though. Von Clausewitz is not exalting it by saying, we should all be courageous. No, we should mostly be intelligent and cautious as much as we can when it's needed to be so. But then we need courage as well in certain circumstances, because without that we can't accomplish anything either, right? So it all depends. And von Clausewitz says, but because it is so, that is, that courage is a nobler instinct, courage will not allow itself to be used as a lifeless instrument, which produces its effects exactly according to prescribed measure. Right? This is important because fear does, right? Fear basically responds to, there are other factors to account. Of course, awareness is one of them. Ignorance can make you more reckless, like less prudent. But courage doesn't quite work like that. Like fear is immediate. It comes out of calculation of what the odds are, right? Saying, this is too dangerous, get back. And you can't even measure that. Because at the end of the day, it's an economical choice, right? Even if we don't like to accept it in this way, in many ways, we are structured in we like to give us a kind of ideal moral base of our decisions, but actually, behaviorally speaking, most of what we do is decided in an approximation to mathematical calculus that obviously we fail to do, meaning that we don't know anything at every time, but it's in part based on that. And it's naturally based on our awareness and our knowledge, how much we can calculate, right? Lots of other problems that already by themselves tell you how difficult it is to make the right choice. But fear is immediate in this sense. You don't have to inject anything in yourself to feel fear, or to, right? It's immediate. It's the single most important thing, because if we didn't have that, we would harm ourselves. We would kill ourselves very, very, very easily, right? Instead, since we are children, we learn that, slamming against something hurts, right? And we don't do it anymore. That's how we learn, right? And we remember, right? We acknowledge that, but there are also certain other things that are kind of instinctual in the way we're programmed genetically, aside from certain acquired experience. Courage is not like that. Courage is another thing. Courage has to be produced, right? It's not produced. There is an effort that must be done, that has to take into account also, that has to take into account danger and to assess it, but at the same time can't be calculated on the base of, as if we had just a distributor of courage, right? We have to commit ourselves in ways that we can just more or less acknowledge. The reason being that sometimes stemming fear is our main concern at that point, right? Remember that here fear and courage counterbalance each other, but fear has the precedence at an instinctive level. Courage doesn't. Courage needs to be fed by something else. That in turn is different from courage, right? And in fact, von Clausewitz says, courage is therefore no mere counterpoise to danger, not to fear. Note, this is important. Courage is therefore no mere counterpoise to danger, in order to neutralize the latter in its effects, but a peculiar power in itself, right? Fear stems from danger. Courage, instead, is to be produced to neutralize the effects of danger, that is fear, right? As a peculiar power in itself. This is important, right? Because what von Clausewitz is saying here is that, if courage was just to neutralize danger in itself, was felt at least to neutralize danger in itself, it would be like on the same level of fear, right? Fear would be the same opposite. It would be the reverse, because it would be instead to amplify the effects of danger, that is to make us aware of what is may happen, right? So courage, in this sense, is a peculiar power in itself. Fear is a hell of a power in its own, but you basically don't, you're not responsible for it. You're responsible for fear in the moment in which you don't produce courage. That's the point. You have to produce the inhibitor of fear in order to counter fear, because it's normal to fear, right? Fear in itself is not a shame. This is what all kind of old sayings say. It's not about matter of fear, having fear. Everybody fears. It's normal. It's natural. It's biological. It's instinctive. It's biological. It's normal. Evolution taught us that, because otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? And we are here exactly because we have learned the hardest way, the price of what happens when we don't have fear, right? But the courage is not. Courage is not instinctive, right? There are certain instinctive reactions that can trigger courage that haven't, however, anything to do with fear. Like hate can produce courage into us. Like, let's assume someone is attacking someone you love. Well, you get triggered and you don't care about fear because you immediately get courageous enough to attack that person, to neutralize it in turn. That's instinctive as well, but it's not courage. It's not courage like at that point condescending to fear or being dependent on the same on danger, right? Courage is just like a boost that you give yourself, and it may not be sufficient at times to strike back. You may still, you always have a part of courage within yourself, a degree of courage within yourself, but it's not necessarily enough to act, right? And that's also why courage has different types of it. Like, while fear is basically the same, if I remember correctly, in Clausewitzian theory, courage is not. Courage has different... courage can be modulated according to the situation. It takes some courage to do something that is not just a different amount of courage, is a different quality of courage. Determination is different from bravery, like acts of bravado, right? So I think this tells you, in my opinion, how deep von Clausewitz's understanding of psychology was, right? At this point, this is literally how we know today our mind works, and this guy knew that in the 30s of the 19th century at the latest. And this is quite a thing. And what I would like to make you reflect on when reading this stuff is that this guy is not writing out of speculation, right? This, as I always say, this is a guy who fought in every single war of coalition during Napoleonic Wars. So this is a guy who started fighting when he was 12 and ended up becoming a general in the Prussian army. And he fought, he had very important roles. Even at Battle of Waterloo, he had at one point some not secondary tasks in the rare activity. And he, for connections and others, not literally at the campaign of Waterloo, not at Battle of Waterloo. But if I remember correctly, actually, and the point here is that he has lived all these things he talks about on his skin, right? Remember, there is that beautiful, I don't remember which paragraph of chapter that was, when he describes what it is to arrive on the battlefield, right? That he describes, incidentally, just to make you understand how your mind starts spinning when you get exposed to danger, in fact. So the same danger that we have observed today, like this thing that makes every activity in war living and moving, like the bird in the air or the fish in the water, in the same danger, right? So to move it, and that passage was aimed, in fact, at making you realize how difficult it is to be courageous in such a situation, but also to show how human mind can adapt relatively to that situation, how even psychologically speaking, there is always a degree of fear that erodes you progressively when you're exposed to danger, but at the same time, the first fear, the fear of first impression, even in face of very dangerous things, kind of naturally dies out after, 30 minutes, because you're there and you have to stay there. So things that are real, right? So talking about these things is having experienced them on your own, right? I don't know what you were thinking while I was explaining this. Like, did you ever experience the same thing? Like, have you ever thought of courage like in these terms, or fear in these terms? Because frankly, I did, right? I realize what he's talking about here in terms of how fear works and how courage works, right? And it's two different things. It takes two different characters. Of course, I'm not saying that, I know what this guy went through. I'm just talking about what in this paragraph, he describes like how fear and courage interact and stem from. Right? In the face of danger, like think about a situation in which you felt like freaking out because you were exposed to a serious threat, right? Even like every form of danger, it doesn't have to be a fight necessarily, but a fight is quite important because that is kind of a resistant, like that gets closer to what von Clausewitz is concerned about. But this can be for everything, right? So I think he's pretty accurate in this description. So alright, it's a series. This is a parasite. Excuse me. I was just reading the next paragraphs, what he's talking about. Yeah, I think today we can stop it here. It's just usually I talk more, but I don't think there is much to add, because this is very analytical, and it's very well explained, self-explanatory, fairly simple to learn. There isn't anything that should give you trouble, but always bear in mind what von Clausewitz says, because this is not a book of maxims, of anecdotes. This is really a chain. If you forget one step of this, you can't understand what's afterwards, right? So you have to ideally remember every single thing that von Clausewitz said at this point. And well, okay, there is kind of a general understanding that, especially right to this point in reading the Vom Kriege, you should have acquired to understand how von Clausewitz's reasoning, right, sometimes is naturally repeating what he has said, but just to introduce every single time something new, right? So there is never a repetition that is not necessary for adding something new, right? This is a big system. It works like this. It's very effective. It's very logical. It's iron logical. And it gets straight to the end. So, alright, so for today I think we stop here. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.